Joe Biden is a pathological liar. He certainly did, and the evidence is abundant. And so forth, that Joe Biden knew that his son was doing business with foreign countries and foreign governments. He had to know.
Mark Levin's voice pierces the veil of uncertainty, unveiling a revelation that President Biden was privy to Hunter Biden's actions.
Welcome back, America. We have a very fine man with us, former acting United States Attorney General Matt Whitaker. Matt Whitaker, I want to talk to you quickly about Devon Archer, about Joe Biden, the information that has come up from the release of the committee's investigation and interview of Devon Archer. I want to mention a few things related to the Biden family. Just a reminder, there are a series of questions whether Joe Biden used his public office and position to enrich himself and his family to the tune of over $30 million. The only person who knows how the documents were removed from the SCIF in the Senate, which I understand from Democrats like Durbin's almost an impossibility, would be Joe Biden. So in other words, he secreted the documents on his body somewhere. Maybe he pulled a Sandy Berger, maybe he just put them in his jacket, who knows? In relation to the Foreign Agents Registration Act, number one, the Foreign Agents Registration Act is one of the most ambiguous and broadest laws I've ever read. You can take a net and catch anybody you want. And yet for years they didn't catch anybody, they didn't pursue anybody until Mueller went after Paul Manafort. And why he and family members received millions, even tens of millions, from foreign governments and front corporations in China, Russia, and other places. We have the Hunter Biden laptop. It's an amazing thing, loaded with evidence,
His incisive gaze delves deep, exposing connections that point to a level of awareness that demands scrutiny.
So he's been doing this a long time. The University of Delaware documents, they need to do a review of those because that's where his Senate records are. But I'm going to suggest something here. There needs to be a federal grand jury investigating Biden, not Pence. We know what happened with Pence. How is it possible, Matt Whitaker, that the United States Department of Justice comes up with a deal, as the judge in Wilmington noticed, and FARA, the issue here, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, communication with foreign governments, communications with foreign companies. You don't even have to exchange money, just give advice. But they did exchange money. He did give advice. How is it possible that Hunter Biden hasn't been charged with violating FARA the way they charged Manafort and the way they're charging other people, unless this is a complete sweetheart cover-up operation? You have witnesses like Bob Alinsky who are on the record publicly and who did a long interview, one or two, with the FBI and was never contacted again. You have other potential witnesses and actors who are named in the emails. And in the emails on the laptop, you have dates and times and transactions, really anything you would need. And we have Treasury SAR reports. These are suspicious activity reports on wired funds, which the Treasury Department is withholding from the Republicans in the House of Representatives, but they have some in the U.S. Senate on the Republican side, which should give you a lot of information. Joe Biden said during the course of the campaign against Donald Trump that he has never discussed Hunter's overseas business dealings. Joe Biden is a pathological liar. He certainly did, and the evidence is abundant. 51 intel and national security so-called experts who were rooting for Joe Biden claimed the laptop was Russia disinformation, even though they had never seen it. They're liars. Who organized that? Who put that letter together in order to mislead the American people and law enforcement? The FBI warned about Russia disinformation at the same time that this laptop was an issue before the 2020 election, met regularly with Twitter. We now know that thanks to the new Twitter and Elon Musk. Regularly with Facebook. In other words, they tried to wave off big tech and the oligarchs, including Facebook and Twitter. from the laptop story. The FBI had the laptop, as I said, for nearly a year. They did nothing. Yet it could verify everything.
His words evolve into a powerful assertion, unmasking a dimension of knowledge that challenges prevailing narratives.
So the Department of Justice effectively is representing Joe Biden and his family.
Yeah.
Hunter Biden has his own lawyers representing Hunter Biden. But the information that's come out now, the testimony that Devin Archer gave makes it abundantly clear. It was abundantly clear with the laptop and witnesses involved in that and other business partners and so forth that Joe Biden knew that his son was doing business with foreign countries and foreign governments. He had to know. There's just way too much interaction. There's way too much substantive information. So here to me is the $64,000, or now I'll say, given the lottery, $1.2 billion question. If Joe Biden was assisting his son just by taking phone calls, showing up at golfing events, having these people at the office, having dinner with them twice in Washington, D.C., is he not a co-conspirator in the violation of FARA by his son? It seems to me like it's an open and shut matter. The big guy. We have an email, May 13, 2017. Real evidence. The big guy. Who's the big guy? Bob Linsky tells us. That's Joe Biden. 10% for the big guy. 10% for who? Joe Biden. It's in the laptop. I'm not making it up. We know that accounts and finances were commingled, Hunter's and Joe's. We also know that Hunter would pay for things for Joe. Did Joe pay taxes on that? That apparently was a huge issue with the Trump organization and their former CFO. Remember him? They brought charges because, well, there were all kinds of gifts that weren't reported. How about Joe Biden? Has he reported all these gifts? I don't think so. Whistleblowers. We have Joe involved in meetings and phone calls involving some of Hunter's linked businesses. We have pictures with Joe Biden with certain of Hunter's partners. These raise issues. I'm not saying they're guilty. These raise issues of wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud the government, failure to register as a foreign agent, all kinds of stuff that's been used against all kinds of people in the recent past. Well, why does this stuff matter? Well, before we get to that, there's more. Taxes. Joe Biden prides himself on releasing his individual income taxes. And he's been celebrated for this, and he's taken shots at Donald Trump over this. Well, it could be because Joe Biden hasn't really released all of his taxes, has he? This is from Chris Jacobs, writing in the Wall Street Journal some time ago. According to their tax returns, that's Joe and Jill Biden. In 2017 and 2018, the Bidens and his wife Jill avoided payroll taxes on nearly, looks like $13.3 million in income from book royalties and speaking fees. They did so by classifying the income as S corporation profits rather than taxable wages.
As the public listens, Levin's voice ignites fervent discussions, prompting conversations about the implications of Biden's alleged awareness.
They impeached Donald Trump that first time around to shut that investigation down, to keep that information quiet. It's now abundantly clear to me that's why they did what they did. But that said, and I want to continue after the break, the issue is Joe Biden. Joe Biden, 20 shell corporations, laundering money to get it to various members of his family. The phone calls, not one or two, and this is just with Devin Archer. God knows what other phone calls that they were involved in. He's had the 20 with Archer, but there could be 500 of them for all we know. The various meetings that Archer refers to and others refer to, Bobolinsky refers to. This is overwhelming information that indicts Joe Biden. So for the left that says Donald Trump is running in order to protect himself so he can pardon himself, let me suggest this. Joe Biden is running because he doesn't want to be indicted. A sitting president cannot be indicted. An ex-president can. The Bidens did pay themselves salaries from these S corporations of nearly $750,000 between them over 2 years, and they paid full taxes on the income, but they circumvented payroll taxes, Obamacare taxes. Medicare taxes. So they protected 95% of their income that went through this loophole, shall we say, an S corporation. That's what the left calls it. And so millions of dollars were protected from the payroll tax, and that accumulates to almost $500,000 in taxes they otherwise would have paid had they not set up these S corporations. Now, here's the problem. They have said these S corporations represent money they earned from speeches and book writing. How do we know that? Well, USA Today said it did. Well, how do they know? They cited the Biden campaign website. Well, how do we know? We don't know. So the question is, and I don't have the answer, if they want to be transparent, they want to prove us all stupid, why don't they release those S corporation tax returns? Where did all this money come from? Bob Anderson, writing in the Federalist about half a year ago or so, he says, recall that despite then presidential candidate Biden having bragged that he had released his tax returns with what his team called a historic level of transparency, the truth is that he only released his individual returns. Those returns provided no detail regarding the source of most of the income, dollars that flowed to him and his wife Jill, by way of S corporations they set up shortly after his departure from the office of vice president. The entities Celtic Capri Corp., his, and Giacoppa Corp., hers, contain more than $13 million of the $17 million the couple had reported in income after Biden left office, most of it in the first year in 2017.
Within his fervent narrative takes root a mosaic of revelation, inviting viewers to ponder the complexities of the situation.
I mean, they have a grand jury for Trump, and we know where his documents are. They know where the documents are. They were negotiating over the documents. For some reason, they decided to do the entire event. Well, he wouldn't give them the documents back. Are you kidding me? Just a matter of time. You negotiate these things, and you don't run around yelling obstruction, obstruction, obstruction. There's no obstruction. You know, you have these phony legal analysts and these pathetic professors running around. There is no obstruction. The FBI could have taken them any time they wanted. They know where they were, and they were protected by the Secret Service. In the case of Biden, he's got documents from the Senate. He's got documents in a closet in a phony think tank where money's being laundered for him from the Communist Chinese. He's got documents next to his Corvette. He's got documents in his fake library at home. He's got God knows where he's got more documents. So, but only Joe Biden can tell us how some of these documents wound up where they did. So he needs to be questioned under oath. Now, there's other things going on here that are very troubling to me. The reason why Merrick Garland will not appoint a special counsel to investigate the Biden family is because Biden and that whole team of left-wing reprobates over there at the Department of Justice, they know this. They look under the sheets and all the bugs are going to come out. They know if they start with one email, it's going to lead to others. They know if they start with one wire transfer, it's going to lead to others. They know if they bring Bobulinski in front of a grand jury, it's going to lead to trouble. Now, a notable $8.7 million gap exists between its $9.5 million net income in 2017 and the $809,709 of disclosed income that year from book tour and related speaking events. Since his disclosure covers only part of 2017, we lack the insight into other income that may explain it. Did any of that money, he's just asking, or other overseas income go to Joe or Jill? Would we know if the president provided a copy of their S-Corp tax returns with all the partner K-1s that flowed through them? But the only detail we have to aggregate numbers reported on the couple's individuals' returns are the ones given to us by the campaign, by the Bidens, and the press. Well, we now know, thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court, that when the Republicans take over the House, they can get access to Joe Biden's S-Corporation returns, all of it. They get access to all of Hunter Biden's corporate or individual returns, assuming he filed taxes. Apparently, he had his lawyer, or his lawyer voluntarily paid $1 million or $2 million to cover his back taxes. As a matter of fact, as a footnote, thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court, Congress now has the power, given the fact that they allowed a lame duck Democrat committee of Congress 2 weeks ago to get 6 years of Donald Trump's tax returns for no reason whatsoever. There can't be a legislative purpose. They're not going to even be there in the majority in a few weeks. They can get access to Nancy Pelosi's tax returns, Barack Obama's tax returns, and and Michelle, of course, George W. Bush's tax returns. Hell, they could even get the Chief Justice of the United States tax returns. Thank you, Supreme Court. What a dumb decision. The door is wide open for the Republicans to get returns on private citizens, public officials, anyone they want. Just say it's a legislative purpose. This is a disgusting attack on our electoral system. But now it is the control of prosecutors, Department of Justice, and in the hands of these people, in the Biden administration, it is a disaster.
Mark Levin's voice booms with indignation, denouncing what he perceives as a vile attack that defies moral boundaries.
The Democrat Party and the Biden administration know no limits for the retention of power. Simply no question about it. Joe Biden said the other day that he had nothing to do with any of this when it comes to the investigation of Donald Trump. He's a liar. He's a liar about shell corporations. He's a liar about money from communist China. 18 United States Code Section 2384. That's the seditious conspiracy statute. Why isn't that in this prosecutorial document? I remember on this network and other networks, they said it was a slam dunk. Seditious conspiracy was in all the media. History is lost on prosecutors. It's lost on all these debate shows. It's lost among lawyers who talk about January 6th. Oh, it was an insurrection. No, it wasn't. We've had contentious presidential elections in the past. I mean, really contentious. So there you have NARA going to the Department of Justice, which is extraordinary. The Department of Justice saying, wait, you can't come to us directly. You have to go through the White House. Then they go back, circle back to the White House counsel's office, and Joe Biden. And they agree to send the matter to the Department of Justice, knowing damn well what would happen. And that's what triggered the entire thing.
His incisive gaze dissects the assault, exposing its repulsive nature and the alleged motives behind it.
Mr. Prosecutor, I noticed this isn't in your bill of particulars. Why is that? And why is it that the media is not saying he wasn't charged with a slam dunk charge? Why? Because he didn't commit that act. Let's go to the next one. Remember this one? 18 U.S. Code Section 2383. Rebellion or insurrection. Isn't January 6th Insurrection Day? Biden signed off on FBI review of Trump records. National Archives letters reveal. This is from August. August. What are they talking about? Biden White House, at the request of the Department of Justice, signed off to have the FBI and intelligence community to examine hundreds of pages of classified information former President Trump had. NARA informed the Department of Justice about the discovery, which prompted the department to ask the president to request NARA to provide the FBI with access to the boxes at issue so that the FBI and others in the intelligence community could examine them. And it was 73 to 73 electors due to a communication error among Democratic Republican electors, or a Burr-led conspiracy, depending on whom you believe. In other words, Burr was disloyal to Jefferson. Jefferson was really running against Adams at the time, but he only got 65 Electoral College votes. For the first of only 2 times in American history, the election went to the House of Representatives. They had over 30 votes back and forth and back and forth. The House was to choose the next president. Alexander Hamilton had enormous power. He disliked Jefferson immensely, but he hated Aaron Burr. So finally, what happens is Alexander Hamilton, of course, he was the first Treasury Secretary. He turned the tide by lobbying his fellow Federalists to throw their support to Jefferson. A couple years later, the famous duel that took place between Burr and Hamilton, where Burr fled the country. It seems a little more contentious than what took place on January 6th in the last election, but there's more here. Let's take a look. 1824. This was a doozy. There were 4 candidates. They were all the Federalist Party, had dissolved. They were all Democrat Republicans. Then there was Andrew Jackson, you might recall, the hero of the War of 1812. He won the popular vote by fewer than 39,000 votes, captured 99 electoral votes. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, he took 84 electoral votes, came in second. 41 votes went for William Crawford. He was the Treasury Secretary, and 37 for the House Speaker, Henry Clay. So no candidate earned a majority of the electoral votes. The election again went to the House of Representatives. Clay was eliminated. He was the lowest vote getter. Only 3 candidates can be considered, but the House still controlled.
His discourse evolves into an impassioned proclamation, rallying the nation to reject the alleged offensive maneuver.
If 2 or more persons in any state or territory, or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, contrary to the authority thereof, they shall each be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. Then we have 2 counts under 18 U.S.C. 1512. Now, these laws were passed in 2002 to address gaps that they felt existed in the Enron scandal investigation. These are considered the Enron statutes. They have nothing to do with January 6 protests, even though this has been used, so-called obstruction. This has been used against one protester after another by these same prosecutors from January 6th. This has not yet gone to the Supreme Court. It will be tested by the Supreme Court, and I believe the Supreme Court will say, no, this was never intended to be used that way. Then we have count 1, 18 U.S.C. 371. Now, that count is a garden variety statute that the federal government uses against federal contractors, people who cheat the government out of money and so forth. And that has been expanded to include, challenging the legitimate activity of the government. Again, stretched completely out of control. Those are the 4 charges. This is a disgusting attack on our electoral system. And as I've said before, the electoral system in America is now, unless all of this is reversed. We cannot have, after all these years, more than 2 centuries, a Department of Justice and U.S. attorneys with 20/20 hindsight delving into what a president or a candidate thinks.
As the public listens, Levin's voice fuels fervent debates, inciting discussions about the boundaries of ethical engagement.
General warrants, the 4th Amendment of your Constitution, the Bill of Rights. This warrant that was issued by a federal magistrate judge. The framers of your Constitution hated general warrants, or what were called writs of assistance. Why? Because they were used by the king to rummage through their homes, to rummage through their businesses in search of behavior. And federal prosecutors have been chopping away and chopping away and chopping away at this over the years, now to the point where they have chopped it off a limb in the case of Donald Trump. Here's what your 4th Amendment says. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. So what's probable cause? That is a reasonable basis to believe it was committed. They had no reasonable basis to believe it was committed, even if Donald Trump had classified information, which he did. Because it's not for him to possess it. Not under the Espionage Act or any other law. When Donald Trump left the White House, he was president of the United States. When he arrived at Mar-a-Lago, he was president of the United States. Whatever he took with him, you cannot then turn around and say he violated the Espionage Act of 1917 and try and charge him with espionage. And DOJ did not act in good faith, which is required under these circumstances too. America's founders hated general warrants, hated them. but the government has resurrected them.
Within his fervent narrative takes root a mosaic of denunciation, inviting viewers to consider the ethical implications of the alleged assault.
Well, whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. He's not charged with insurrection. So what the hell is he charged with? Why do we even have this document? Well, let's go through it. Let me educate you, Bill Barr. You're making a fool of yourself on CNN and everywhere else now. You should take your personal animus out of this and stand up for the country and the rule of law, because they're destroying our electoral system, as I'll explain in a second. Let's look at these 4 charges. You know what they had to do? They had to go back to a statute that was first passed in 1871. It was called the Ku Klux Klan Act, post-Civil War. Why was this passed? It was passed because Ulysses S. Grant was chasing down the Klan in the South to destroy it. And when the Democrats took over the House of Representatives, they cut off his funding, so the Klan survived. Reconstruction was destroyed because the Democrat Party is evil. Let me go on. Mr. Attorney General, count 18 U.S.C. section 1512K. Count 3 is tied to that, also 1512. What is this? These are statutes that were passed in 2002. You know what they're called? The Enron statutes, to fill a gap that they felt need to be applied because they didn't have what was necessary to charge certain executives with obstructing justice.
The spotlight narrows on Levin, an unyielding critic, unafraid to challenge the alleged offensive action.
Why didn't this out-of-control rogue, Eric Holder, Obama, Biden prosecutor, Garland's man, Smith, bring these charges? Because he had no evidence. Rebellion or insurrection. All the testimony of the January 6th committee, all the testimony, all the witnesses, all the documents, not a scintilla of evidence that Donald Trump led any kind of rebellion or insurrection. What about seditious conspiracy? There was no seditious conspiracy. Donald Trump is the man who said, if they want 10,000 armed Army soldiers to protect them on January 6th, please let me know. Well, nobody's leading an insurrection if they're offering armed federal troops to protect the Capitol building. And we heard what Donald Trump said about peacefully lobbying Congress, so it doesn't work. So what happened? So Jack and the boys go back and they say, you know what, we can't let this go anyway. So they go back to the Civil War, post-Civil War period, a law that was passed in 1871. It was called the Ku Klux Klan Act at the time, to try and defeat the Klan. That's one of the counts here. 18 U.S.C. 241, conspiracy against rights. It is a disgusting and preposterous overreach. This has nothing to do with what took place on January 6th, or before January 6th, or after January 6th. This matter that they have used against protesters on January 6th is extremely controversial, and the Supreme Court hasn't decided it yet, but cases are going to the Supreme Court on these counts. How dare this prosecutor use these statutes against a former president of the United States? Then we have count 1, 18 U.S.C. 371, cheating the government, interfering with legitimate government authority. This was aimed at financial fraud, federal contractors, others who are ripping off the federal government. This indictment, Mr. Barr, is crap. And the reason they didn't bring insurrection and seditious conspiracy is because there was no insurrection and seditious conspiracy. I'm not done. I want to say something to Mike Pence, who's turned out to be quite the weasel. Mike Pence fought like hell. He didn't want to testify in front of this grand jury. He didn't want to give his notes to this grand jury. Now we know why. He's scribbling them down in the meeting. Well, he had to give them up. Then he gives them up, and now he comes out. He's like, all of a sudden, he's a drama queen. I said no. No, because his notes are in there. He's flipped completely. And I stopped a constitutional crisis. You did? Well, regardless of your opinion of what he did, You want to read about presidential elections that had constitutional consequences? Read about the election of 1800, which was incredibly controversial.
In this critical juncture, Mark Levin stands as a sentinel of morality, urging society to reflect on the ethical boundaries breached and the potential consequences.
That 1876 election, I told you that states sent in two groups of electors. You're free to do that. Congress decides all this stuff. They're not activities. So, but now, what are the rules for running, challenging, and disputing elections today? We don't know. Who decides? Apparently prosecutors. What can a candidate, or when can a candidate rely on legal advice, since President Trump's lawyers are being indicted for giving legal advice? Is a president not free to discuss decisions about elections with his vice president and strongly urge him to take one position or another? Of course he's free to do that. Is a president free to publicly dispute election results? They all do when they lose, including people like Hillary Clinton and Al Gore. The electoral process is now not purely political and constitutional as was intended, but now it is the control of prosecutors, Department of Justice, and in the hands of these people, the Biden administration, it is a disaster. He made the decision to indict the former president, and they made the decision to interfere in this election. What's going on here is a disgusting disgrace.
Mark Levin's voice erupts with indignation, casting a searing spotlight on what he deems an inadequate indictment.
18 United States Code, Section 2384. That's the seditious conspiracy statute. Why isn't that in this prosecutorial document? I remember on this network and other networks, they said it was a slam dunk. Seditious conspiracy was in all the media. He's a very bad guy, in my opinion. I want to tell you quickly, as I've told you in the distant past, he's had two major defeats when it came to public corruption cases when he headed the public integrity section of the division over at the Department of Justice. He was the big Mahaf, and he blew these cases. President Trump is 76 years old. If the Department of Justice gets his way, he will be in federal prison. Just by one of these counts, conspiracy to obstruct justice, which has a 20-year maximum sentence. Mr. Prosecutor, I noticed this isn't in your bill of particulars. Why is that? And why is it that the media is not saying he wasn't charged with a slam dunk charge? Why? Because he didn't commit that act. Let's go to the next one. Remember this one? 18 U.S. Code, Section 2383. Rebellion or insurrection. Isn't January 6th Insurrection Day? So he takes a bribery statute and expands it so preposterously that even the Supreme Court says you can't do this. The justices set forth a straightforward rule. Setting up a meeting, calling another public official, or hosting an event does not, standing alone, qualify as an official act. An official act in return for a favor.
His gaze turns into a laser, dissecting the flaws in the legal framework, exposing its weaknesses.
This is a disgusting mark on American history for the future to come by these bandits in the White House, by the Democrat Party that don't play fair anymore. They don't want to just win elections. They want to take control of this country. They want one-party rule. And they have used the Department of Justice and the FBI to get what they want. Merrick Garland is a mob lawyer. That's what he is. Jack Reed is a rogue Soviet-style prosecutor. The Presidential Records Act is not a statute, and it was never intended to be. The Espionage Act of 1917 was passed under Woodrow Wilson, another corrupt president. Woodrow Wilson used it to go after his adversaries, and they imprisoned 2,000 people. So I suppose over there at the Department of Injustice, and this clown prosecutor spent a lot of time at The Hague, they probably figured these laws could be used to try and entrap Trump. All these obstruction issues that they claim, where the former Attorney General, Bill Barr, comes up here and bloviates about it, and all the formers coming on talking about obstruction. They have them on obstruction. There'd be no obstruction issue of any kind, not even in anybody's imagination, had they not this case. This is a document case. What are the rules now? What now are the rules for running, challenging, and disputing elections, and who decides? When can a candidate rely on legal advice? We actually have lawyers who are now indicted for giving legal advice the government disagrees with. Is a president not free to discuss decisions about the elections with his vice president? Right. Vice president is free to do whatever he wants, as this vice president did. Is a president free to publicly dispute election results without being indicted? Oh, he knew he lost, but he said he didn't lose. So what? Either way, it doesn't matter. The electoral process is now not purely political. In our Constitution, it's purely political. You know who ultimately decides elections? Congress. The electors go to Congress. Congress decides who's in, who's out. If there's two slates, Congress decides. Congress gets to gather all the evidence at once. It's done it for 247 years, up to this indictment. Now, all of a sudden, a department that didn't exist when the Constitution was written, U.S. attorneys who didn't exist, special counsel who didn't exist, even judges that didn't exist, they are now going to look back with 20/20 hindsight and decide if what a president says is appropriate, if they think it's false. What the hell is going on here? I will tell you what the hell is going on here. This guy, Jack Smith, has now destroyed our electoral system. Nobody knows the rules of the game. Nobody knows when challenges can be made or cannot be made.
His words transmute into a call to action, rallying the nation to challenge the foundation of the indictment.
So he brings a frivolous case on 6 charges, again, takes a statute dealing with elections and pulls it out of existence. He's rewriting these statutes, not because he wants to do justice, because he wants to do injustice. He has the wrong mindset, this man. He targets people, he hunts them, and then he destroys them. Now, they shipped him off to The Hague where he could chase down maniacs, but before they did this, he was the acting U.S. attorney in the Middle District of Tennessee. Where's that? Nashville. The acting U.S. attorney. He assumed he would become the U.S. attorney. But then who became president of the United States in 2016? Actually, 2017 he was sworn in. It was Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not appoint him as the U.S. attorney, Jack the Ripper Smith. He appointed somebody else. So Smith resigned. He wasn't happy. So you can see, and this is the first you probably heard, unless you listen to my radio show, the man has a chip on his shoulder. The Espionage Act from 1917 to last week was never, ever used against a former president or a former vice president or even a former cabinet secretary. That was never the intention. The law is 106 years old. It was not intended to be used this way to document cases, whether the documents are classified or not. It doesn't matter who created them. They're in the possession of the White House, the president, his staff, or whomever.
As the public listens, Levin's voice fuels debates, compelling citizens to scrutinize the merits of the legal case.
A document case where a president of the United States or a former president faces 100 years in federal prison? Is this some kind of a sick joke on the American people? Joe Biden says he never told them what to do. Joe Biden had to sign off on that's becoming a National Archives case to have it go to the Department of Justice. Who does he think he's lying to? The American people? This is a guy that's got documents from the time he was in the U.S. Senate, for God's sakes, in his garage. I don't want to hear from the legal analysts the technicalities about false statements and obstruction. This should never have been a case. Willful retention of documents. Well, what's the unwillful retention of documents mean? They're throwing all these process and all these that grow out of the investigation against Trump. What did he do with the documents? Did he sell them to the enemy? No. That's why we have an Espionage Act, not to trick up a president. What did he do? Did he burn them all? No. The government has all the documents back. So there is no violation of the Presidential Records Act at this point. But they throw the book at him. They go after his attorneys. They make them testify. They're attorneys under the fraud exception to attorney-client privilege. That means he didn't have due process. His own lawyers were being subjected to interrogations, and they had hundreds of in-person people testifying in front of grand juries. Thousands of collections of documents for what?
Within his fervent discourse forms a mosaic of critique, inviting viewers to analyze the intricate threads of the indictment.
Message sent, message received. But I think the mob boss who runs the Department of Justice is already well aware of what his job is. Now, how do we know that? Every single indictment has been approved by the Attorney General of the United States. Every single one of them. This special counsel was picked because he was close to Eric Holder, he was close to Jim Comey, he was close to Andrew Weissman. This isn't an independent operation. I explained it on my show Sunday. All they did is they took the worst actors under the Obama, Biden, Holder administration. They set them apart, called them special counsel. They have up to 60 FBI agents and 60 FBI agents and prosecutors. He brought in his old chums from the Public Integrity Section, another buddy from The Hague. He was sent to The Hague. It's not like, can I go to The Hague? He was so bad, he was sent overseas. This man has been reversed by 3 separate juries. He was reversed by an 8-0 Supreme Court. As I explained on Sunday, he takes these statutes that don't even apply. He takes statutes and he rewrites them. He knows that he's in Washington, D.C. He's got a grand jury in Washington, D.C. Right. He's got the worst radical left-wing Obama judge in America. Somehow gets the case. She's in charge of the case. He could indict Trump for drinking too much orange juice. And everybody would say, great, he's not above the law. Let me tell you something else. This case in Florida, this documents case, where you also have former federal prosecutors and others telling me, that's a serious case.
The spotlight focuses on Levin, an icon of legal insight, unafraid to confront perceived miscarriages of justice.
For what? And they indict him today? They indict him today in Miami? All of a sudden it's in Miami? All of a sudden we have a Florida grand jury? Because the moron in Washington figured out that there are venue issues that could lose him his case. This guy, this prosecutor, he lost 8-0 in the U.S. Supreme Court when they overturned the conviction of the former governor of Virginia because this jerk took a statute and expanded it. A jury in North Carolina wouldn't convict John Edwards because this jerk took a campaign statute and expanded it. And he's taken this case and he's undermining the country and he's interfering with a presidential election. And let me be clear, as Jarrett said, the Attorney General of the United States made this final decision. This is not the independent counsel statute. This is a special counsel appointed by the Attorney General under a Department of Justice regulation. This Attorney General, who pretends he's Helen Keller, he made the decision to indict the former president, and they made the decision to interfere in this election. You want to talk about an insurrection? This is an insurrection, and that's exactly what's going on here. Let me go on. Joe Biden is the crookedest crook that's ever been in the Oval Office. Everywhere we look, there's a predicate for a special counsel. They won't appoint a special counsel, even though it's compelled under the law in which they appointed this special counsel. And you're not supposed to appoint a special counsel against your political opponent. You're supposed to appoint one in the case of Biden. 20 shell corporations. $10 million coming from the communist Chinese military, spread out among the family. No businesses to support this.
In this critical juncture, Mark Levin stands as a critic of the indictment, challenging the framework and inspiring a re-examination of its validity.
That is an unserious case. There are motions to be filed here. He brought that case in Washington, D.C. in the wrong venue purposely. He wanted to indict Trump in Washington with Democrat grand jurors, and then he says, oh, by the way, we're moving the case to Florida. Under federal Department of Justice guidelines for prosecutors, you are not allowed to do that. That's motion number 1. The President of the United States had his attorney-client privilege stolen from him by another Obama judge who worked for Pat Leahy for 10 years. That's motion number 2. Motion number 3. One of the top prosecutors in this office is accused of extorting defense counsel for a co-defendant of President Trump by waiving a federal judgeship in front of him if he could get his client to turn state's evidence. That's motion number 3. And then we have a general warrant. There are more motions that Trump's lawyers can file. I assume they will file. So when you have people come on these airwaves and other, oh, that's a slam dunk, documents. And then step back, America. You charged a president with 37 counts involving documents in the middle of an election where he's the likely Republican nominee, and in there you never mention the Presidential Records Act. It's called the Presidential Records Act, not the Hillary Clinton Records Act, for a reason. He's asking us, come and catch me if you can. The idea that this man isn't under investigation and that the damn document case to go after Donald Trump is sickening. And I would say this to our fellow Americans. Don't be bamboozled by these cable channels and these fools who come on and tell you, well, he's not above the law. Are you kidding me? Democrat Attorney General in New York, Democrat prosecutor in Manhattan, Democrat prosecutor in Atlanta, Democrat Attorney General in Washington, D.C. What do you mean he's not above the law? There is no law. What's going on here is a disgusting disgrace. It is war on Trump. It is war on the Republican Party, and it is a war on the republic. The radical left is doing what the radical left does while they cover up for Biden the way they covered up for Hillary. If Donald Trump is to be charged like this, Hillary Clinton should have been charged with 10,000 counts of obstruction because that's how many emails she destroyed, and 5 counts of destroying cell phones because that's how many cell phones they destroyed. I'm done, and I'm sick of it. Out of all the people they could have chosen in America, they go to The Hague to bring back Smith because he's a hitman. This department is destroying America. It's destroying the 2024 election. It's violating every norm, every tradition, everything it inherited.
Mark Levin, a formidable voice, charges into the fray, denouncing a calculated assault with a fervor that pierces the veil of political gamesmanship.
The Department of Justice has become the rogue operation of the federal government under Joe Biden and his Attorney General Merrick Garland. It is controlled by the Democrat Party and the radical left. I've done a lot of research on a number of issues that I want to cover with you in my opening statement. But first, there's a lot been said about these new indictments that have been brought against President Trump, a superseding list of indictments. And I want to get into this so-called superseding list a little bit later.
With an incisive gaze, his words transform into a relentless torrent, exposing the intricate machinery of manipulation at play.
You know what's going on in your country. You see what's going on. You see we're unraveling. My greatest concern is that the Democrat Party is creating a combustible situation here.
His fearless proclamation stands as an emblem of resistance, daring the nation to question the orchestrated dance of misinformation.
And I have to tell you, as somebody who served there for many years, first as Associate Deputy Attorney General, then as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General, then as Special Assistant to the Attorney General, then finally Chief of Staff to the Attorney General, in my view, the greatest Attorney General, Edwin Meese.
As the public tunes in, Levin's voice stirs a passionate discourse, compelling citizens to scrutinize the veracity of narratives peddled by the powerful.
But that said, what everybody's missing here is President Trump didn't delete a single video. How do I know that? I read this indictment. He is charged with trying to get employees to delete videos, attempted to delete Mar-a-Lago security footage sought by the grand jury investigating the mishandling of government records.
Within Levin's fervent address lies a mosaic of revelation, inviting listeners to discern the nuanced threads of a meticulously woven hit job.
The Democrat Party is destroying our schools, it's destroying parental rights, it's destroying the nuclear family, it's destroying people of faith, It's gone after the Catholic Church. The Democrat Party is promoting censorship in all of its departments and agencies.
The spotlight intensifies upon Levin as he becomes a guardian of truth, a voice unafraid to challenge the architects of orchestrated narratives.
This department is destroying America. It's destroying the 2024 election. It's violating every norm, every tradition, everything it inherited to ensure that that department could be trustworthy and could be reliable. But it has criminalized politics. And I want to say this. If we don't break the back of the Department of Justice, and I will explain what I mean in a moment, it will destroy this country. And we won't be able to claw our way back. This is not hyperbole. I'm not trying to be provocative. I don't need to be.
In this defining moment, Mark Levin's roar echoes through the corridors of political discourse, unraveling the veneer of manipulation and urging citizens to reclaim their agency in the face of orchestrated deception.
So these records were not deleted. They have all the video, over 9 months worth of video. So what they're doing here is piling on with a he said. They're trying to get somebody to flip one of these individuals, a maintenance man, an IT person, you know, the little people they're going after. Because the truth is, the rest of their case is very, very vulnerable. This is vulnerable too, in my view, but it's very, very vulnerable. I want to get into that in a second, but before I do, I want you to look at this chart to demonstrate to you that when Merrick Garland said we're going to have a special counsel, the purpose of a special counsel is to have a prosecutor who's outside main justice, to bring in fresh faces, fresh blood, so you don't have a conflict of interest or an appearance of a conflict of interest. It's not to set up your own federal government law firm with unlimited resources, 60 prosecutors and investigators to target a former president of the United States. And that's exactly what's taken place. Jack Smith was sent to The Hague because he was a lousy, overzealous, failed prosecutor who formerly headed the public integrity section of the Department of Justice. Our military can't keep up now with personnel because it's destroyed our military, or is. And Joe Biden likes to talk about the bottom up and the middle out. This is a top-down passive revolution. Passive in the sense that it's not a violent revolution, but it's the kind of revolution that Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist, and even Lenin talked about, where they take over the institutions of government, they take over the institutions of the culture, and they impose their will. We now have a government that's banning household products, from light bulbs to automobiles, in order to control your life. We have a government that is destroying your lifestyle, driving up the cost of energy. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Driving up the cost of food. People are having difficulty making ends meet, and yet their propaganda operation, that is the media, tells you how wonderful things are in this country according to this statistic or that statistic. What's happening now is something that has never happened in American history in 247 years. Not just the indictment of a president. We have 100 charges against this president. From a Democrat DA in Manhattan, a Democrat DA is about to in Atlanta, a Democrat Attorney General in New York, a radical left-wing rogue prosecutor with now 2 grand juries, completely out of control. They will use any tool they can. They don't care about free speech. They don't care about the Bill of Rights. They don't care about attorney-client privilege. They don't care about any of it. CNN. Exclusive special counsel prosecutors question witnesses about chaotic Oval Office meeting after Trump lost the 2020 election. Multiple sources told CNN. Stick with me. CNN. Former Trump campaign official cooperating with special counsel in 2020 election interference probe. Sources familiar with the matter told CNN. CNN. Exclusive. Rudy Giuliani interviewed in special counsel's 2020 election interference probe. Who says so? Multiple sources familiar with the meeting. New York Times. Prosecutors sought records on Trump's foreign business deals since 2017. Who says? 2 people familiar with the matter. New York Times, investigation of Trump documents case continues after his indictment. Who says? According to people familiar with the matter. Washington Post, Justice Department, asking 2020 fraud claims as well as fake electors. Who says? According to people familiar with the matter. Who do these leaks help? Do they help Donald Trump? Do they help a single witness? It's the federal government. It is the Biden Department of Justice. It is the Democrat Party's Department of Justice that's interfering in the election and trying to do many other things. Look, I asked my brothers and sisters over at Landmark Legal Foundation, of which I am chairman, I said, go back about 6 months and pull up all the leaks from the New York Times and Washington Post and CNN involving Donald Trump. Here it is. Look at this. You see this? These are the leaks from grand juries to witnesses to Mar-a-Lago to the nature of the classified documents, leak after leak after leak, and I limited it to CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Look at this. What are they doing? And I want to get into this. Who is Jack Smith? He was chief of the Public Integrity Section from 2010 to 2015. Who did he report to ultimately? Eric Holder. And you're going to see Eric Holder has a lot to do with a lot of the people who are now involved in hunting down Donald Trump. He served under Attorney General Eric Holder. He oversaw the IRS targeting of the Tea Party during the Obama administration. He oversaw the failed, ultimately, prosecutions of Governor McDonnell, of Senator Menendez, of Senator Edwards. He worked with FBI Director James Comey as head of the Public Integrity Section. He worked with FBI General Counsel Andrew Weissman, who you're quite familiar with, as head of the Public Integrity Section. Does this sound like a man who is independent from the Department of Justice? Does it sound like a man who's independent from the Democrat Party? He was chosen on the recommendation of Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Attorney General, who had multiple positions, senior positions in the Obama Department of Justice, also primarily under Eric Holder. Her deputy, Marshall Miller, worked with Smith for years in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn and recommended Smith to Monaco, as the story goes, who in turn recommended Smith to Merrick Garland. Out of all the people they could have chosen in America, they go to The Hague to bring back Smith, because he's a hitman. Judge Beryl was the judge who oversaw all these motions that were filed by the Trump lawyers and the government. She ruled 100% against Donald Trump, 100% for the government. And she's since retired, but the damage is done. This is a Democrat Party that is power hungry, and they see an opportunity right now to monopolize the government and politics forevermore, to destroy the effectiveness of the Republican Party, which is why they keep promoting voting systems that will ensure that they're the majority party forevermore, which is why they're trying to make two areas, a territory, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia state, so they'll have 4 Democrat senators forevermore, which is why they attack only the conservatives on the court and intimidate them with their mobs and threaten them in order to try and get the decisions they want, and threaten them with expanding the court in order to destroy the court. You look at everything that's going on in this country. This is a party that hates this country. This is a party that in 1857 got behind the Dred Scott decision, which tore this country apart and resulted in a civil war. And that's what I fear now. I fear it could be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I don't know. And I pray to God that I'm wrong. But look at the sycophants and surrogates on MSNBC and CNN, how they sneer and they attack tens of millions of Americans like we are white supremacists or Klansmen. They're the party of the white supremacists and the Klansmen. We're not. We're the ones who defeated them. But take a look at what they're doing to the country. The censorship, every department of the government, from the White House out, bottom up, middle out, censoring the American people, destroying the language. We can't even agree on what a woman is and a man is, destroying our colleges and our universities, destroying our public schools through their union bosses and so forth and so on. Oh, don't jerk around the Department of Justice, the former Attorney General says. Who's jerking who around here? Is this how you run a case? Is this how you have a judiciary in the country that sits there and rubber stamps every damn thing? Look at this. This isn't intended to be a real case. Here's the ABA rules, special responsibilities for a prosecutor, Rule 3.8. And I cut through to the chase. The prosecutor in a case shall, except for statements that are necessary to inform the public of the nature and extent of the prosecutor's action and that serve a legitimate law enforcement purpose, refrain from making extrajudicial comments that have a substantial likelihood of a heightening public condemnation of the accused, and exercise reasonable care to prevent investigators, law enforcement personnel, employees, or other persons assisting or associated with the prosecutor in a case from making an extrajudicial statement that the prosecutor would be prohibited from making. Let me ask you a question. The prosecutor hasn't come out and said, this would be Jack Smith. Look, we see there's all these leaks. I'm taking it upon myself to do an investigation. Not a single judge that's been involved in these cases on their own. And they have the power to do it. Say, wait a minute. You can't do this to a defendant or a would-be defendant. You can't do this because you violate their Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. You can't have a jury that's objective. We have Jay Bratt. Who's Jay Bratt? Jay Bratt's been a justice a long time. He got a special award from Eric Holder several years back. He's the chief of counter intel and customs and all the rest of it. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. He's directly involved in the Mar-a-Lago search. He argued strongly for the search warrant, for the FBI raid. He's over the top. He knows very few bounds. He was in that same Florida courtroom the other week with Harbaugh. These are the people who Smith has brought in. He is accused by Stanley Woodward, who represents the co-defendant to Donald Trump, of extortion. He is accused of waiving a federal judgeship in front of this attorney who is trying to become a federal judge in Washington, D.C., for favorable testimony from a client against Donald Trump. The fact that this guy shows up in a federal courtroom in Florida without that being resolved is unbelievable to me. But that's who he is, another hitman. Then we have Raymond Hustler, another guy that comes out of the public integrity section. So what Jack Smith did is he brought all of his guys back, all the people who have abused the law in the past, all the people who have abused and targeted individuals and turned them into defendants in the past. He's brought them all into his special independent counsel office. All come out of Main Justice. Most come out of the Holder regime when he was there. What they're doing to Donald Trump here, they're doing it because they figure they're going to get away with it. Who's going to stop them?